There's a quote, more often than not attributed to the 18th century French philosopher Voltaire. You tend to hear it when someone fears free speech is being threatened. Truth be told, he probably never said it. It was written in 1906 in a biography of Voltaire to sum up his overall attitude. But more than a century later, it's still valid. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. But there's a difference between free speech and abusive or attack speech, and separating those two things out is crucial. In this instance, I'm talking about comments made recently on the British news channel GB News, the kind of comments which have angered many, rightly, but have now gone to a whole new level. And it actually starts on the BBC, the Politics live show, and a discussion about whether Britain would benefit from a minister for men.
I think that it feeds into the culture a little bit, this Minister for Men argument. In my mind, I think there should be a Minister for Mental Health, which would be all-encompassing. I mean, you've got something like 7 million children waiting for prescriptions for mental health at the moment. It's a crisis that's endemic throughout the country, not specific to men. And I think, a lot of ministers kind of bandy this about to sort of, I'm sorry, but make an enemy out of women. I think, not you, and I don't think your book is. I don't
accept that. I don't think it is to make an enemy. If we looked at during COVID, men were literally more likely to die from COVID. And I don't really want to cast myself as a meninist or one of these guys from the manosphere, because that's not who I am. But I do find it interesting that sometimes the arguments tend to throw it back.
But who was doing all the work during COVID? A lot of the time, if you looked into people's households, it was the women who were taking on the laundry, the school care, all of that.
I'm not disputing any of that. What I'm saying that there are specific issues that men face that might warrant specific attention. I mean, literally, the biggest killer of men under 50 is suicide. That is an arresting statistic, and if that doesn't warrant specific attention, mental health is an umbrella issue.
I have to say that is also because women are unsuccessful. That is a lot of feeds into that statistic.
But it feels like, it just doesn't feel like you've got any space for this idea that men might have unique challenges that face them. And the problem is, even as I'm saying this, in my mind, it's like I've got out the violin, and I don't want to be.
Read the book,
I don't want to be this guy, because that's part of the problem. Is because you're encouraged.
That's Ava Santina Evans on the right, political correspondent for the news website Joe, arguing that a minister for men isn't the way to go. Of course, it's her view, which she was invited to give. And it got picked up by GB News when Lawrence Fox, a presenter on the channel, was interviewed by the presenter of another GB show, Dan Wootton.
Show me a single self-respecting man that would like to climb into bed with that woman, ever. Ever. Who wasn't an incel, who wasn't a cucked little incel. That little woman has been fed, spoon-fed oppression day after day after day after day, starting with the lie of the gender wage gap. And she sat there, and I'm going like, if I met you in a bar and that was like sentence 3, chances of me just walking away are just huge. We need powerful, strong, amazing women who make great points for themselves. We don't need these sort of feminist 4.0. They're pathetic and embarrassing. Who'd want to shag that?
Oh, Lawrence. Well, look, she.
Sorry,
right. I'm just going to provide a touch of balance from her, because she did actually respond to this earlier today, saying that she regretted her comments, but she didn't apologise. Yes, so there you go. And she's a very beautiful woman, Lawrence. Very beautiful.
Now that was verbal abuse, attack speech, which had no bearing on the content of what Evans said. It was uninvited, nasty, and wholly unnecessary. It was not an example of free speech in action. Predictably, and rightly, there was swift outrage. GB News apologised. Both Wootton and Fox were suspended and made apologies of sorts, and the matter drew upwards of 7,000 complaints to the British broadcasting regulator Ofcom. But through it all have been the cries of free speech, especially from Fox himself, which has led to these sorts of discussions and comments. Have a look at this from the BBC's flagship news and current affairs programme, Newsnight.
I have to say, I think the complaints have piled up against GB News. I think there is a delicate and important broadcast ecology in this country. I think, GB News is trying to bust that ecology, and frankly, what Ofcom should do is shut it down, like it shut down RT.
It's easy for me to sit here and say, and actually agree with Adam, I think it should be taken off air. It was entirely predictable that Lawrence Fox was going to come out with a statement that was that offensive. I think what was less predictable would be Dan Wootton's smirking reaction. But really, I think Ofcom deserves a bit of time and space to do its job. And if we as Parliament aren't happy with the regulations that are set, then maybe we should be tightening them up.
These are Poundland Fox News channels, these right-wing channels that are coming, that have been developed in the last 2 years. The right of the Conservative Party and in this country is coalescing around this TV channel. They employ at least 4 former cabinet ministers. This is a very major thing that's happening here, or at least they hope it's going to be. And so this little fracas is just the tip of the iceberg.
And that is where we must find that crucial separation I mentioned earlier. GB News is unashamedly right-wing, just like Fox News in the US or any number of other news outlets anywhere in the world. It's very opinion-driven and tabloidy. It's not the kind of journalism I'm particularly a fan of, but even I can see it's found a niche in this current climate. In fact, in a market and an industry with generally falling viewership, GB is now claiming it is Britain's #1 TV news channel, beating the BBC and Sky News, though read the fine print and you'll see that was just on one day. But to suggest that there's a delicate broadcast ecology in the UK which GB News should be kicked out of, in the way a channel backed by the Russian government was, now that is free speech under attack. Certainly the kind of abuse which Laurence Fox made should not happen, and if it does, then the broadcaster and the individual need to be penalised. Actually, I'd say the issue which really needs to be addressed at GB News and others is the fact that there are Conservative MPs, sitting MPs, who host shows on the channel, which to me is utterly baffling if we're talking about an outlet of the fourth estate. But calling for GB News to be taken off air, and that's not just a couple of people's opinion, there is a lot of ill will towards GB. I don't know, I think that's just as concerning as anything the channel itself has put to air. It is effectively a call for censorship. And it raises this repeating issue of trying to silo views which some sides don't like. For example, here in New Zealand there is a broadly conservative talkback radio station. It's called News Talk ZB, and it has just launched its own subscription service called ZB+. Now, a writer for a more liberal website, The Spin-Off, said recently that he thinks ZB+ is a good idea. Certainly it's a good business model, because it keeps the ZB content distinct from the other outlets at its parent company, which is NZME. But then he also said this.
There is a mainstream media which discusses a particular basket of issues in a particular kind of way, and that's great for most people most of the time. But just as we need a strong Māori media sector, just as we need a, Pacific Media Network to kind of give voice to those views, that kind of agitated, sometimes angry, often but not exclusively Pākehā sort of right-wing view, it's better that it have a platform where it is kind of controlled and kind of given a logic and a rigor and a test than it is just kind of festering away on Telegram and, in WhatsApp groups and in private Facebook groups. I just fundamentally believe that. I believe that very, very deeply. And I think if you're going to do something like this, ZB is the most obvious place to do it.
And again, that is his view and that is his right to have it. Personally, I don't agree. That argument seems to say that right-wing views are broadly bad or extreme, so it's better to have them controlled behind a paywall for all the angry people to subscribe to, and not freely available for all and sundry to read. Of course, what that ignores is that there are also angry and extreme views on the left too, and right-wing people probably think they should be behind a paywall. But the beauty of free speech, actual free speech, is that I can disagree with that viewpoint privately, or in this case publicly, yet still respect it and the person's right to voice it. I don't know, I like to think it's what Voltaire would have wanted. Whatever the issue is though, provided it's not abusive or defamatory, I don't think censorship or limiting access is the answer. Call out what needs to be called out, give the regulators the power to take real action, and I guess strive to have higher journalistic standards, whatever angle you're coming from.